1. Russian Empire uproots any ability for personal initiative and collective action, be it pro or against Kremlin. 2. Maidan Effect. Revolution, cadre change, many staunch supporters of the new order in army and intelligence. Order 338. The Institute for the Study of War. The Kremlin proposed an amendment to federal laws on Russian armed forces supply matters to the Russian State Duma on the 30th of June, introducing special measures in the economic sphere obliging Russian businesses, regardless of ownership, to supply Russian special military operations. Correct, but it lacks the context. On the same day, the 30th of June, the Donetsk People's Republic ruler Pushilin signed the Order 338 prohibiting the free entrance of humanitarian aid from Russia to the DPR. Most of this aid was not really humanitarian, but army supplies. Thread. DPR introduced the accreditation of humanitarian aid. Previously, Russian citizens could purchase in Russia whatever and ship it to the DPR as humanitarian aid. That was a legal way to supply the pro-Russian militias in Ukraine with arms equipment by individual contributions. Now the DPR introduced the accreditation, so shipping there anything gonna be harder. Besides, the Order 338 prohibits importing 1 guns and ammo, 2 lots of modern radio sets, 3 quadcopter, technically, to DPR from Russia as humanitarian aid for pro-Russian militias. Why would they do that? Well, it perfectly illustrates the logic of the Russian state, which may be counterintuitive for Westerners. The Russian government are total control freaks and are determined to extirpate any agency and activism, including the pro-Kremlin activism. When the Donbas War only started, many pro-Russian militias there were not fully controlled by Kremlin. Some pro-Russian warlords in Donbas were genuine believers, some adventurers, some mix of both. Motorola used to wash cars in Russia, but left to Donbas and became a warlord. Whether they were adventurers or genuine Russian nationalists, most of these guys were upstarts, alien to the Russian political regime. Kremlin used them, but would never tolerate them. Every single pro-Russian warlord in Donbas was assassinated. Some in Donbas, some in Russia, except for one. There's only one early Donbas warlord who's not only alive, but still in power. Khodakovsky. Why Kremlin didn't cleanse him like others? Because he's different from them. Others used to wash cars. Khodakovsky used to serve in the Ukrainian State Security, SBU. Every single of pro-Russian warlords in Donbas died under the mysterious circumstances, some in Donbas, others in Russia. Kremlin cleansed everyone. The only one they left alive and in power is the former Ukrainian intelligence officer. That makes perfect sense. First, he is tainted. He's a turncloak and everyone knows that, so it's super easy to control him. Most probably Kremlin has compromise on him that would absolutely destroy his reputation. He knows that and will never trespass or object to Kremlin under any circumstances. Even more importantly, he is from pre-2014 SBU. Let's be honest, Ukraine did its dramatic breakup with the Soviet tradition and model of governance only in 2014. Before 2014, it was much like Russia, and SBU was much like the FSB. They were not that different as many presume. The meaning of Maidan is vastly underrated. It was the 2014 when the USSR died for real. Before 2014, Ukrainian military, intelligence and even more importantly the military-industrial complex kept the same ties with their Russian colleagues as before. That was Soviet continuity. Russia is FSB-run state and the FSB openly call themselves the new nobility. This should be taken literally. They are the new nobility. So it makes total sense that during the conquest of Ukraine they'll rely on noblemen like Khodakovsky rather than on peasants like Motorola. Kremlin is genuinely and sincerely horrified of where Ukraine is drifting after 2014. Before 2014, they perceived the Ukrainian elite as similar to them, maybe somewhat inferior. Soviet community and Soviet continuity didn't finish in 1991. It finished in 2014. Maidan, Crimea and the Donbas War, That's what killed the USSR. How? Before 2014, Ukrainian security apparatus was largely Soviet. After 2014 they had quick and massive cadre change. It seems that in the state's security it was especially massive and profound. It was a revolution. When we are discussing the popular support of revolutions, we typically miss the elephant in the room, namely, the cadre change. Almost every revolution decreases the general quality of life for years, but they still generate tons of staunch supporters through the cadre change. Yes, social collapse makes the life worse, but it allows tons of ambitious upstarts to rise. Would a simple Cossack and co. Semyon Budyonny have any chance to be the commander of cavalry under the old regime? No, but Soviets cleansed the upper ranks and opened him the way. The white propaganda depicted the revolution as Jewish. In reality though, with most of nobility and officer corps cleansed, it were mostly young Great Russian peasants who were quickly trained to take their places. They were absolutely happy and would fight for the new regime. Revolutions almost always decrease the general quality of life for years to come. Also the purges may be very cruel, but with the old elites purged, you need to recruit someone else on their places. You must do a cadre change. Accelerated social mobility generates a mass support. French or even more so Russian revolutions are extreme cases, which I chose because they are so well known and illustrative. What is important here is the causal link. Regime change, purges, cadre change, tons of new upstarts, tons of staunch supporters for the new order. Maidan was not as radical as 1789 or 1914, but Russia was so much appalled with it that it escalated the armed conflict, and the armed conflict led to the cadre change. Much of the old army establishment was not that reliable, and much of state security absolutely wasn't. War with Russia brought a cadre change in the state's security and intelligence. First, it expanded. Second, it was cleansed from the old cadres, creating a social elevator. Yesterday you'd catch fish and cook it in a bucket on open fire. Tomorrow you'd be a special forces officer. It's quite typical for Ukrainian intelligence officers to be much younger than their Western colleagues they meet with. Why? Well, largely because the old Soviet cadres were cleansed. That's what changed the face of regime, and that's what generated massive staunch supporters. 2014 killed the Soviet Union. Cadre change in Ukraine broke the former community between the Russian and Ukrainian state security. Old Soviet cadres were gradually cleansed, breaking the continuity, and those that came to their places would not like the old order to return. Honestly, I think that if Putin did a massive invasion in 2014, he would succeed. First of all, many East Ukrainians still thought of themselves as Soviet Russian, but by 2022 many of them just died or turned too old to make any real effect. History moves one death at a time. Second, he absolutely would be able to make a horse trade with much of the Ukrainian military and state security. Yes, many would refuse, but there would be enough of collaborators to secure quick victory. People's revolt in Donbas were largely local Siloviki changing colors. Putin's decision to keep a small-scale war for 8 years and then do a mass invasion was insane. First, identity of East Ukraine changed over these years. Many of those who held old Soviet identity were just too old now. Second, security apparatus went through a cadre change. 2. In 2014 Putin could realistically expect that many powerful interest groups in Ukraine would assist in his invasion, but then he for some reason took a pause of 8 years. By February 2022, most of them were fired, dead or under arrest. Medvedchuk is the best known example, of course. So let's return to the initial question. Why would Kremlin restrict supply of the humanitarian aid, making supplies of its own militias in Ukraine harder? Because even Russian imperialist activism is still activism, and the Kremlin never ever allows any type of activism, ever. If nationalist and imperialist circles in Russia continue shipping the valuable aid to the Russian Donbas troops as they did before, they may establish too many valuable horizontal connections. Fighters on the front line may like those guys and even start depending upon them. That's exactly what many Russian imperialists hoped for. Consider Chadeyev. He writes that collecting and shipping the valuable equipment to Donbas, we build our own patriotic civil society. What he didn't said is that we established direct connections with guys on the front line. Kremlin would never allow it. Any genuine believer, even Russian imperialist, is suspicious. Now you may stand for the Tsar, because of your views, but that implies that tomorrow you may stand against the Tsar, because of your views. Strong personal opinions are problematic. Russian imperialists who thought they would be allowed to build a real civil society by organizing the supply the Russian troops in Ukraine were naive. That's 1. Personal initiative. 2. Collective action. And Kremlin is strongly determined to uproot your capacity for either. Irrespectively of Putin, Russian political system depends upon uprooting the ability for personal initiative and collective action. Any ruler in Kremlin will be forced to uproot them to save the empire. Dismantling the empire is the only way to enfranchise its people. End of thread.